This is the story of Formula One's new teams that competed in the Formula One World Championship during the 2010s. Running on limited budgets, the three teams in question rarely got themselves off the back of the grid to tangle with the more established teams of the time, but nonetheless had their own exciting and challenging battles for the coveted 10th place in the Constructors' Championship. In 2009, the FIA announced their intention to expand the size of the Formula One grid in 2010, allowing up to 13 teams to compete. On June 12th of that year, 3 teams were selected from 15 applicants: Campos Meta, Manor Grand Prix and USF1. Campos Meta formed in February 2009 as a collaboration between Adrian Campos, who had ran the Campos Racing Team in the GP2 series before handing it over to Alejandro Agag, who renamed it Adax Team, and Enrique Rodriguez of Meta Image, a sports advertising agency based in Madrid, from which the name Campos Meta was formed. Their intention was to be Formula One's first Spanish team, which helped to secure a variety of Spanish shareholders. Manor Grand Prix was formed between John Booth, who ran Manor Motorsport, and designer Nick Worth of Worth Research, who previously designed cars for the Simtech F1 team in the mid-90s. They employed Alex Tye as team principal, Graham Loudon as director of racing, Booth as sporting director, and Worth as chief technical designer. USF1 was formed by former designer Ken Anderson and journalist Peter Windsor, with the intention of being an all-American team based outside of Europe. As these were startup teams, an agreement was formed with the 10 established teams to supply both technical support and parts to the new teams, in exchange for having the proposed budget cap withdrawn. On July 28th, BMW Sauber announced their withdrawal from Formula One, at which point their place on the grid was taken by Lotus Racing. Despite being named after an iconic British constructor, the Lotus Racing Team was formed when the original Team Lotus's sister company Lightspeed failed in their own bid to get on the F1 grid and approached Malaysian entrepreneur Tony Fernandez, who already had connections to Formula One by sponsoring the Williams team through his AirAsia airline. The team was operated by the One Malaysia Racing Team, which was jointly owned by Natsa Group and Tune Group, and worked in partnership with the Malaysian government, though they stressed that their involvement was strictly through the national car manufacturer Proton, who owned Lotus cars and therefore the naming rights. The 4 teams slowly began their preparations for the 2010 season, with all 4 choosing Cosworth as their engine supplier. Lotus recruited Mike Gascoigne as their chief technical designer and began building their first car at their hastily built factory in Norfolk in September. In December, they announced experienced veterans Jarno Trulli and Heikki Kovalainen as their 2 drivers for the 2010 season, with Malaysian driver Fairouz Forzi as test and reserve driver. Richard Branson purchased an 80% share in Manor Racing at the end of the 2009 season after his bid to purchase Brawn GP had failed in place of Mercedes, and so Manor Racing was renamed to Virgin Racing, with their headquarters in Dinnington in South Yorkshire and their factory in Bicester. Tye subsequently left his position as team principal and was succeeded by Booth, with Loudon then becoming CEO. They announced former Toyota driver Timo Glock and Brazilian rookie Lucas de Grassi as their 2 drivers for the 2010 season in November. Campos Meta set themselves up at Meta Image's offices in Madrid, with the factory being at Campos Racing's headquarters in Valencia. In October, they built their own headquarters at the Parque Tecnológico Fuente Alamo Science Park in Murcia, with their 2010 car being built by Italian manufacturer Dallara. USF1 set up headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina, with the intention of having a second base at Motorland Aragon in Spain for use during the European leg of the season. However, during the winter break, it became clear that both USF1 and Campos Meta were struggling financially, despite the latter announcing Bruno Senna as their first driver at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. On February 20th, 2010, Peter Windsor asked for permission to miss the first 4 races of the season and make their debut at the Spanish Grand Prix. 8 days later, this became permission to defer completely until the 2011 season. An attempt was made to merge with Zoran Stefanovic's Stefan Grand Prix, who had been attempting to get on the grid in their own right despite not being on the entry list. However, this fell through, and USF1 quickly dissolved. On February 19th, Campos Meta's financial woes were alleviated when they were taken over by majority shareholder Jose Ramon Carabante. He replaced Adrian Campos as team principal with Colin Coles and renamed the team Hispania Racing Team after Carabante's Grupo Hispania, or HRT for short, with their headquarters also being moved to Grupo Hispania's in Murcia. Nick Worth took the bold decision to design Virgin's first car, the VR01, entirely using computational fluid dynamics instead of the more conventional wind tunnel testing, with the incorrect assumption that this would eventually become obsolete. The car was meant to be launched on the team's website on February 3rd, however technical issues prevented this from happening before successfully passing the mandatory FIA crash tests and performing a shakedown at Silverstone the following day. The following week, they tested the car alongside the established teams at the winter testing session at Jerez. Only 5 laps were completed by Glock on a wet first day. This increased to 11 on the second day before the front wing failed and was unable to be repaired or replaced due to a lack of spare parts. De Grassi made his debut the next day with a modified front wing. The second test was mostly wet and plagued with hydraulic problems which gradually alleviated, allowing the drivers to complete long runs. However, the hydraulic problems returned during the third and final test session at Catalonia, which forced a redesign of various components before the first race at Bahrain. Lotus completed a private shakedown of their first car, the T127, at Silverstone on February 9th, driven by Forzi. The car was officially launched on February 12th before heading to Spain for pre-season testing. HRT's financial woes created numerous delays in getting their car ready. They missed pre-season testing completely and launched the Dallara-built F110 on March 4th, as well as announcing Karun Chandhok as their second driver. Later in the month, they brought on BAR and Red Bull veteran Jeff Willis as their technical consultant, though he later said he was very unimpressed with the car and felt it was well below Formula One's engineering standards. All 3 teams successfully arrived in Bahrain for the first race of the season, with all having various teething problems in practice. Both Lotus drivers were able to set times, albeit 3 seconds off those of the Toro Rossos. Glock was able to match them, however De Grassi failed to complete a single lap in first practice. HRT had 2 completely untested chassis that were still being finished in the Bahrain garages, with Senna just fitting in 2 installation laps before the end of first practice. Senna managed to do complete runs in the second session, however he was struggling to match the fastest times of GP2 Asia Series drivers, and finished 4 seconds off the Virgin's times. All drivers except Chandhok took part in Saturday practice, with Glock losing a wheel during the session. When qualifying came about, the 6 drivers were unsurprisingly eliminated in Q1 and took the final 6 places on the grid. Glock was fastest in 19th, albeit 2.7 seconds off of Toro Rosso's Jaime Alguersuari in 18th, followed by Trulli, Kovalainen, De Grassi, Senna, 3 seconds off of De Grassi's time, and finally Karun Chandhok, who eventually got out on track and set a time 1.7 seconds off of Senna and more than 10 seconds off of Q1 leader Fernando Alonso's time. The race was difficult for all teams. Chandhok hit a bump on the second lap he did not know existed and retired with broken suspension, with De Grassi following a lap later with another hydraulic failure. Glock lost out to Kovalainen at the start and then lasted a mere 16 laps before losing 3rd and 5th gears, with Senna stopping on the sharp finish straight the following lap with an overheating engine, leaving just the Lotuses standing. Trulli completed 46 laps before the hydraulics failed, but was still classified in 17th, leaving Kovalainen as the only official finisher from the new teams in 15th, 2 laps down from race winner Alonso. Before the Australian Grand Prix, it came to light that Virgin's fuel tanks were not actually large enough to complete a race at full speed. The FIA gave permission for them to lengthen the wheelbase and enlarge the engine cover to accommodate the enlarged tanks, however they would not be ready until the Spanish Grand Prix. The 6 drivers once again took up the final 3 rows on the grid, with Kovalainen being fastest this time, 2.3 seconds off Vitaly Petrov's time in 18th. HRT had made enormous grounds from Bahrain, taking 23rd and 24th, but within 2 seconds of Kovalainen's time. This eventually became 21st and 22nd after Trulli, Glock and De Grassi all decided to start from the pit lane. Trulli had had a loose seat fitting all weekend and then suffered hydraulic failure on the grid. However, the team were unable to fix it and he failed to start the race, whereas both Virgins had their fuel collectors replaced after having to run with excessively heavy fuel loads during qualifying. The safety car came out after a first lap crash between Kamui Kobayashi, Sebastian Buemi and Nico Hülkenberg before coming back in on lap 4, at which point Senna retired with hydraulic failure. Chandhok had managed to pass his teammate and both Virgins at the start, but quickly fell back after the safety car restart. Michael Schumacher attempted to pass De Grassi on lap 4 for 19th, having pitted on lap 1 for a new front wing. However, De Grassi retook the position around the outside of the Ascari chicane before losing it again on the start-finish straight. Chandhok managed to get past De Grassi during the first pit stop window, but lost out to him on lap 20, before retaking the place when De Grassi retired once again with hydraulic failure 4 laps later. Glock was running in 14th before pitting and retired on lap 45 due to a loose camber shim causing the suspension to move around. This left Kovalainen and Chandhok as the only 2 finishers in 13th and 14th, although 2 laps and 5 down laps on race winner Jenson Button respectively. Virgin had still failed to have either driver finish a race. Malaysia produced a mixed bag of results. Forzi stepped in for Kovalainen in first practice after Trulli won the coin toss. Rain in qualifying created a bizarre grid lineup. Both HRTs outqualified Di Grassi by over 2 seconds, whose lap time in a wet to dry session was 13 seconds off of the fastest time. The Ferraris of Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa and the McLaren of Lewis Hamilton were caught out by the rain and missed the opportunity to set dry laps, which left Trulli as the fastest driver eliminated in Q1, but remarkably caused Kovalainen and Glock to make Q2 for the first time. With Button not setting a time in Q2, they started 15th and 16th on the grid respectively. By the end of the first lap of the race, Kovalainen, Glock and Trulli had been very swiftly passed by the Ferraris and the McLarens. Trulli then collided with Glock when trying to pass him on the third lap, which led to Glock's retirement. Di Grassi passed both HRTs and both Lotuses at the start and remained ahead for the remainder of the race, becoming Virgin's first classified finisher in 14th, albeit in fuel conservation mode. Both HRTs finished next, 3 and 4 laps down. Both Lotuses had hydraulic issues, with Trulli pitting early and remaining behind the HRTs for the rest of the race and finishing last in 17th, with Kovalainen pitting and coming back out 9 laps later, running 6 laps behind the nearest rival and being unclassified at the end after finishing 10 laps behind the winner. At the Chinese Grand Prix, HRT announced former Super Aguri and Spiker driver Sakon Yamamoto as their test driver. The 6 drivers once again took the final 3 rows on the grid, with Glock the fastest, although he would fail to start the race as the car was left on its jacks at the start of the formation lap due to loss of air pressure and was taken back to the pits. Di Grassi started from the pit lane after replacing the clutch. Chandhok had qualified last, but received a needless 5-place grid penalty for having the seal of his car's gearbox broken without an FIA representative present. He later started from the pit lane after changing a hydraulic pump. The start of the race was chaotic. A crash between Kobayashi, Buemi and Vitorino Liuzzi at turn 6 brought out the safety car. Sudden rainfall then caused numerous drivers to pit for intermediate tyres at the end of the second lap. Kovalainen was the only one of the 5 drivers to stay out and was up to 6th when the safety car came in at the end of the third lap. He quickly lost several positions, but then briefly regained them and went up to 6th again after the drivers that had switched to intermediate tyres pitted again for dry ones. However, by lap 13 he had been passed again by all faster cars except Hulkenberg. Virgin decided to send Di Grassi out on lap 9 after he failed to make the start. However, the new clutch only lasted 8 laps. Senna was rear-ended whilst being lapped by Alguersuari on lap 21, whose front wing subsequently broke off and brought out a second safety car. Trulli ran into hydraulic problems once more and was passed by both HRTs before retiring on lap 26. Both HRTs successfully finished the race for the first time, with Senna 2 laps down in 16th and Chandhok the last finisher 4 laps down in 17th. Kovalainen ran in the points for the early part of the race, but inevitably dropped back, but still finished 14th, ahead of Hulkenberg, the first time any of the new teams beat any of the established teams outright. Virgin debuted their enlarged fuel tanks and improved fuel feed systems at the Spanish Grand Prix, finally having the confidence to run as light as possible in qualifying and complete races at full speed. They also brought a new shark fin engine cover. However, due to travel disruptions caused by the eruption of the Icelandic volcano Eyjafjallajökull, meant that only Glock's car was able to be fitted with it. HRT also announced former Red Bull driver Christian Klien as their second test driver alongside Yamamoto, and allowed him to take part in first practice in place of Chandhok. However, as he had not raced since 2006, his FIA Super licence had expired, without which he would not have been allowed to leave the pit lane, but it was reported that he had renewed it just 10 minutes before he went out on track. Trulli was fastest of the 6 drivers, only 1.5 seconds off Barrichello in 18th, though he would later start in 18th following Petrov's grid penalty, followed by Kovalainen, Glock, Di Grassi, Chandhok, who outqualified his teammate for the first time, and then Senna himself in 24th. Senna ended up starting in 21st, as both Virgins were given a 5-place grid penalty for failing to notify the FIA of their gear ratios before the deadline, and Chandhok was given the same penalty for changing his gearbox. Kovalainen failed to start the race when his gearbox attempted to select 2 gears at the same time. Chandhok managed to pass Di Grassi at the start, though they then moved up another place after Senna shot off into the tyre barriers at the very fast turn 3. Trulli maintained the advantage, followed by Glock, Chandhok and Di Grassi. Chandhok got involved in 2 separate incidents in the final sector of the circuit while being lapped. The first saw Massa rear-end Chandhok and damage his front wing, though oddly enough the car handled better with the damage. The second saw Alguersuari cut across Chandhok while passing him and breaking his front wing. Chandhok pitted for a new one but retired a lap later on lap 27 with suspension damage. Trulli finished in 17th, 3 laps down on the leader, while Virgin achieved their first double finish, with Glock finishing on the same lap as Trulli and de Grassi a further lap down. The first Monaco Grand Prix for the new teams proved to be a difficult one. Earlier in the season, there had been proposals to split Q1 into 2 parts for each half of the grid at narrow circuits like Monaco, in order to prevent the slower cars from blocking the faster ones during their hot laps, but this proposal was eventually rejected 1 week prior at Catalonia. Instead, the FIA declared that any driver lapping slower than 1 minute 22 seconds between the first and last corners of the circuit would be penalised. In the future, this would herald the return of the 107% rule. Chandhok completed only 6 laps in first practice after hitting the barriers and spinning at Massenet. The concerns over slow traffic came to fruition in second practice, though ironically it was caused by Massa blocking Kovalainen. Glock failed to set a time in third practice after a series of installation laps followed by a hydraulic failure. Senna had been running all through practice with residual damage from the previous race that hadn't been fixed, causing him to be 2 seconds slower than Chandhok. Despite this, Senna managed to outqualify Chandhok with the 2 Virgins in front followed by the 2 Lotuses. The 6 drivers would line up 18th to 23rd for the race after Alonso failed to set a time following a crash in practice and started from the pit lane. Glock passed Trulli at the start, and Senna opted to pit at the end of lap 2 to do a long stint on the medium tyres to the end after the safety car was brought out following Hülkenberg's crash at the tunnel exit, having just passed both HRTs after stalling on the formation lap and starting from the back. Alonso had passed all 6 drivers by lap 17, but not without a brief tussle with de Grassi for 3 laps for 19th. Glock broke a track roll at Casino Corner on lap 23 while running at 16th. 3 laps later, de Grassi pitted but then retired with loose wheel fittings. Trulli pitted a lap later but had a very slow stop that put him behind both HRTs on track. Senna had got ahead of Chandhok when he pitted but then retired with hydraulic failure on lap 58. On the same lap, Kovalainen came into the garage with broken steering alignment, despite running ahead of his rivals and within sight of Petrov. This left just Chandhok and Trulli remaining. Trulli had been behind Chandhok since his slow pit stop, but 2 laps after their respective teammates retired, Trulli went for an overly ambitious move on Chandhok at Raskas, which ended with Trulli mounting Chandhok and narrowly missing Chandhok's head. This was a race of attrition, in which none of the 6 drivers saw the checkered flag, though Chandhok and Trulli were still classified in 14th and 15th respectively. All 3 teams aimed to bounce back in Turkey following a difficult Monaco campaign, a large, fast and open circuit contrasting with the narrow and confined Monaco streets. HRT's weekend did not get off to a good start after Dallara, who designed and built their car, parted ways with the team. Lotus brought a new rear wing to improve the car's balance, and Virgin finally managed to bring de Grassi's shark fin engine cover modification from the UK. Yamamoto made his on-track debut for HRT by stepping in for Senna in first practice. The 6 drivers once again took the final 3 rows on the grid, with Trulli fastest and Senna managing to outqualify de Grassi. De Grassi ended up starting from the pit lane after an oil issue was discovered 1 hour before the race start. Senna got past Glock and Trulli had a fantastic getaway, managing to get ahead of Liuzzi until the end of the first lap, while Barrichello had a very slow start and fell behind Trulli, Kovalainen and Senna. Hülkenberg and Buemi fell to the back following a collision on the first lap. Barrichello got past Senna, Kovalainen and Trulli by lap 4, while Hülkenberg and Buemi pitted on lap 1, with Hülkenberg passing all of them during the pit stop phase, while Buemi struggled and didn't pass the 2 Lotuses until lap 31. De Grassi made good grounds following his pit lane start and passed Chandhok for 22nd on lap 7. Kovalainen passed Trulli during the pit stops while Senna lost out to both Virgins. He later managed to take advantage of the blue flags to pass de Grassi on lap 29 after running wide at turn 1 on his first attempt the lap before. Kovalainen and Trulli were running in formation comfortably ahead of their rivals with impressive pace, not getting lapped until beyond 50% race distance. However, they retired on laps 33 and 32 respectively, with hydraulic failure once again while running in 19th and 20th. De Grassi struggled with pace and dropped behind Chandhok as well on lap 37 to become the final runner on track in 22nd. Senna managed 46 laps before a fuel pressure issue ended his race, with Chandhok retiring 6 laps later with a broken fuel pump, leaving the 2 Virgins as the sole finishers in 18th and 19th, 3 laps down. The Canadian Grand Prix proved to be a game changer for Formula 1. The resurfaced tarmac produced unprecedented degradation on the soft tyres as they struggled to get up to temperature, making strategy planning exceptionally difficult. The new teams all showed how much they had improved since Bahrain in practice, with the Lotuses only a second off the next fastest cars, HRT beating both Virgins and Chandhok beating Trulli in first practice. De Grassi failed to set a time in first practice, while in third practice Chandhok stopped early on and De Grassi span into the gravel not long after recording the fastest speed of 201 mph in the speed trap. Senna once again beat De Grassi in qualifying, while Chandhok couldn't get a clean lap in and set a time 8 seconds off De Grassi's. All three teams' pace had improved dramatically, with Kovalainen being only 0.2 seconds off Kobayashi in 18th and 1.4 seconds between him and De Grassi. For the first time that year, all 24 drivers started on the grid. Numerous drivers pitted within the first 10 laps due to crash damage and extreme tyre degradation, which briefly promoted Kovalainen to 6th and De Grassi to 10th. Though by the halfway mark they had settled back into Kovalainen in 16th, followed by Trulli, a struggling Petrov, De Grassi, Chandhok and Glock, with Senna retiring from 18th with gearbox failure. The two Lotuses once again consolidated their superior pace, running comfortably ahead of their rivals, until Trulli retired with vibrations on lap 43. Kovalainen was battling with Petrov in the final phase of the race and managed to finish just ahead in 16th. Both Virgins and Chandhok had been dicing back and forth until Glock retired with broken steering on lap 51. Chandhok eventually finished in 18th, 1 lap ahead of De Grassi, but 2 laps behind Kovalainen and 4 laps behind race winner Lewis Hamilton. In first practice for the European Grand Prix, Klein sat in for Chandhok, while Senna's left wing mirror broke off, struck his helmet and was then run over by Buemi, which caused the session to be temporarily stopped. Glock lost 5th gear in second practice, which put an early end to his session. The Lotus cars ran commemorative stickers on their cars to celebrate their 500th start in Formula 1, despite this iteration having a relatively distant link to the original Colin Chapman founded Lotus team that last raced in Formula 1 in 1994. De Grassi outqualified Glock for the first time that season, with Chandhok managing to edge out Senna. Trulli cut the first corner at the start and ran into the back of Della Rosa and broke his front wing. He then dropped back to last after a long pit stop. He then pitted again 3 laps later, already 1 lap down, to allow mechanics to work on a gearbox issue with the engine switched off. He left the pits 2 laps behind Senna and remained that way for the rest of the race. Kovalainen was involved in a dramatic collision on lap 9. Webber had just had a slow pit stop for the medium tyres and rejoined in 19th. He moved to pass Kovalainen on the back straight, but was caught up by how early the Lotus had to brake compared to his Red Bull, and ran into the back of him. Kovalainen's rear wing was torn off and he span into the wall, but he managed to return to the pits and duly retired. Webber was launched into the air upside down, flew into an overhead sign and then speared into the tyre barriers. This naturally brought out the safety car. Chandhok and Senna pitted, but De Grassi and Glock opted to stay out. Glock pitted on lap 24, but later had to do a second unplanned pit stop on lap 36 after locking up heavily when attempting to repass Senna and gave himself a puncture and broke Senna's front wing. Senna pitted a lap later, having not initially realised his front wing was broken. De Grassi had the best race of his career and finished a whole lap ahead of his rivals. Glock passed Chandhok in the final sector of the last lap for 18th, but was later handed a 20-second time penalty for ignoring blue flags. Senna was a further 30 seconds behind, with Trulli 2 laps further back, having never recovered from his broken front wing and gearbox issues. For the British Grand Prix, HRT dropped Senna in favour of Yamamoto, the circumstances around which were mysterious. It was claimed by Colin Collins that it was not for sponsorship reasons. The only recent new sponsor was the JP Group, who had been drawn to the team by Chandhok. Senna was reportedly very unhappy with this, and it was claimed that he had criticised the team in an internal email. However, Collins announced that he would return to race at the German Grand Prix. Lotus Racing renamed themselves Team Lotus and introduced a new floor to their cars to improve downforce and also improved the weight reduction and ballast. Virgin brought major upgrades with a B-spec car that had new front and rear wings, new brake ducts, a revised diffuser and improved barge balls and pod vanes, though Glock had little time to test the upgrades in third practice after a throttle issue early on. The upgrades paid off as Glock outqualified Trulli and came within 0.4 seconds of Kovalainen. Liuzzi would later split Glock and Trulli after receiving a 5-place grid penalty. Trulli had a fantastic start and managed to pass Liuzzi, Glock and Kovalainen on the first lap, while Glock also capitalised on Liuzzi's poor start and got past him too, though Liuzzi would repass him the following lap, followed by Kovalainen on lap 6 and Trulli on lap 10. De Grassi retired on the same lap with hydraulic failure. Glock managed to pass Kovalainen during the pit stops and was challenging Trulli for 16th on lap 46, but oversteered and almost lost the car, then losing out to Kovalainen. He was running only a few seconds behind the Lotuses, but was classified one lap down after being lapped for a second time by race winner Webber just before the checkered flag. The two HRTs finished in formation almost 1 minute behind, with Yamamoto finishing less than a second behind Chandok on his first race since 2007. Going into the German Grand Prix, Yamamoto moved into the second driver's seat after impressing at Silverstone, replacing Chandok and leaving Senna to return. HRT insisted Chandok would race again, but this would end up becoming his last race for the team. Di Grassi failed to set a time in qualifying due to a gearbox issue and would be handed an ultimately pointless 5-place penalty for replacing it. Liuzzi crashed on his second time lap and narrowly missed Glock, leaving all drivers except Yamamoto to out-qualify him, with Glock also receiving a gearbox penalty to line up on the back row beside his teammate. All 6 drivers capitalised on first lap collisions between the Toro Rossos and Force Indias, with Di Grassi managing to also leapfrog both HRTs. Yamamoto had a very slow start after allegedly switching his pit limiter on. Buemi lost his rear wing and Al-Jaswari and both Force Indias pitted at the end of lap 1, moving the 6 drivers up to 15th to 20th. Trulli lost second gear on lap 2 and crawled back to the retirement in the pits. Glock managed to pass Yamamoto on lap 4. Al-Jaswari, Liuzzi and Sutil passed the 5 drivers in the pit stops, with Yamamoto retiring just after his own engine abruptly cut out. The team said it was an electrical fault, but it's believed Yamamoto may have pulled the fire switch by accident instead of the brake bias pedal. Senna got a slow puncture on lap 22nd, which dropped him behind Glock, who inherited 18th from his teammate on lap 50 after Di Grassi drove over a curb and broke his suspension. On lap 56, Kovalainen collided with Della Rosa while being lapped, which broke Della Rosa's front wing and put Kovalainen out of the race, leaving just Glock and Senna to finish in 18th and 19th, 3 and 4 laps down. All 3 teams were beset with recurrent hydraulic problems during Friday practice for the Hungarian Grand Prix, but this did not stop everyone making qualifying. Glock was fastest, although almost 2 seconds off Kobayashi in 18th on the ultra-high downforce circuit, though Kobayashi would end up starting behind all except Yamamoto after receiving a 5-place penalty for missing the scrutineering way bridge on his in-lap. Glock failed to capitalise on his stellar qualifying performance and fell behind both Lotuses and his teammate at the start. Trulli led the pack, however the team opted not to pit him when the safety car came out on lap 15, so when he did pit 5 laps later he came out behind Kovalainen. Di Grassi managed to split the Lotuses at the start but had a poorly fitted left rear tyre during his pit stop, which meant he had to pit again on the next lap, dropping him to last. Kovalainen and Trulli finished less than a second apart in 14th and 15th, 3 laps down, with Glock 26 seconds behind. Senna had good pace and was 30 seconds off of Glock, however Yamamoto had a poor race, finishing not only 1 lap behind Senna, but 30 seconds behind the severely compromised Di Grassi. Formula 1 went to Spa after the summer break, on a weekend beset with variable weather conditions. Q1 was chaotic. Petrov crashed early on, which brought out the red flag. After Q1 resumed, Di Grassi only set a single lap just under 2 minutes 20 seconds before returning to the pits, while his teammate and Kovalainen both made Q2 after the Salvas struggled. Multiple penalties, including one for Glock impeding Yamamoto in Q1, meant that Kovalainen started 13th on the grid, with Trulli 15th, Senna 18th, Yamamoto 19th, Glock 20th and Di Grassi 22nd. Kovalainen failed to capitalise on his grid place and went into anti-stall at the start and quickly dropped back to last. Rain started falling on the first lap, which caused numerous drivers to run wide at the bus stop chicane. In an attempt to dodge the chaos, Glock went through the 50-metre marker board and broke his front wing. He quickly pitted for a new one, however he had to revert to the old spec wing as the only other new spec one had been broken in a crash in practice. Senna clipped his front wing with Kobayashi at La Source at the start and then retired when his suspension gave way, not long after pitting early for intermediate tyres. Glock and Kovalainen also went for intermediates in their unplanned early pit stops, however the rain failed to materialise, which forced them to pit again for dry tyres. Yamamoto's lack of pace showed, as despite his rival's numerous pit stops he still fell to last by lap 15. Trulli and Di Grassi were fortunate to have a heavy downpour in the latter stages of the race coincide with their only scheduled pit stop. Despite this, Trulli had a spin on lap 40 which dropped him from 15th to 19th, while his teammate made a heroic comeback to pass Di Grassi 5 laps before the end of the race to finish best of the new teams in 16th, followed by the 2 Virgins, his unfortunate teammate, and then Yamamoto a further lap down. For Q1 at Monza, the 6 drivers were joined at the back of the grid by Liuzzi with engine issues. Trulli was fastest in 18th, just over a second behind De La Rosa, followed by Kovalainen, Liuzzi, De Grassi, Senna, Yamamoto and Glock, serving a 5-place penalty for a gearbox change. The HRTs were over a second off the Virgins as the only team on the grid not to bring a low downforce package for the long straights of Monza. Glock made up for his grid penalty by launching up to 17th at the start, with all 6 drivers passing a poor starting to Till. Yamamoto passed Senna while De Grassi managed to get past Kovalainen for 3 laps. Senna lasted 11 laps before retiring with hydraulic failure, while his teammate had a dramatic pit stop in which he hit one of the mechanics when exiting the pit box. The team were later fined €20,000 for the unsafe release. Trulli led the new teams for the entire race until suffering a gearbox failure on lap 46. De Grassi had been running close behind Kovalainen until his suspension failed with mere 2 laps to go. This left Glock to finish better than new teams in 17th, with Kovalainen only 2 seconds behind and a slow Yamamoto almost 1 minute further behind. After the race, Cosworth announced that they would not provide engines to Lotus for 2011. There was yet another driver change for HRT under the lights of the Singapore Grand Prix. Yamamoto came down with food poisoning during the week and was replaced with Klein, making this his first race since the Italian Grand Prix in 2006. However, Yamamoto's apparently healthy appearance in the paddock aroused suspicions that he had been dropped for sponsorship reasons instead. De Grassi's seat for Friday Practice 1 was taken by Renault reserve driver Jérôme D'Ambrosio, impeding the time he had to learn the circuit. The 6 drivers struggled in qualifying on the narrow, ultra-high downforce streets, with Glock the fastest but almost 2 seconds off Liuzzi in 17th. All drivers moved up 1 place after Massa failed to set a time. Klein had a fantastic return to the track, beating Senna by over a second, only 0.3 seconds behind Trulli, who struggled and was half a second behind De Grassi, with Kovalainen in 19th. Massa passed both HRTs at the start and then De Grassi at turn 5, who also lost out to Klein. Glock undid his strong qualifying and fell behind Kovalainen. Massa then pitted at the end of the first lap, while Heidfeld also pitted for a new front wing. Al-Jaswari had started from the pit lane, which moved all 6 drivers up to 16th to 21st, all gaining another position when Liuzzi retired on the second lap. The safety car came out on lap 3 and all 6 drivers except Glock pitted, with Lotus and HRT having to double stack their drivers. By not pitting, Glock had moved up to 10th at the restart. Trulli got a puncture when the safety car came in, which dropped him far behind everyone else. Glock was passed straight away by Webber and managed to hold off the rest of the midfield until being passed by Sutil on lap 11 and then running wide on lap 16 and losing 4 places in 2 corners. Trulli had been running a whole lap behind everyone else before retiring on lap 27 with hydraulic issues. Heidfeld eventually passed Glock the following lap. On lap 32, Kobayashi hit the barriers in the tunnel and was then rear-ended by Senna, which brought out the safety car. Glock took the chance to make his first pit stop and came out behind Kovalainen. Klein then retired from his first race in over 4 years with hydraulic issues, ending HRT's weekend early. Both Virgins were wedged in between the Red Bulls of Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber at the restart. De Grassi quickly yielded, but Glock stayed in front of Webber until turn 4, which closed Hamilton up behind, resulting in his race-ending collision with Webber at turn 5. Kovalainen had unlapped himself and quickly ended up 14th after the restart after Hamilton retired, and Heidfeld and Schumacher collided, with Heidfeld also retiring and Schumacher pitting for a new front wing. Glock's gradual descent down the field culminated in him pulling into the pits on lap 51 with hydraulic issues. Kovalainen followed suit in a much more dramatic fashion when he was clipped and spun by Buemi on lap 57, and then had his engine burst into flames, causing Kovalainen to jump out of the car on the start-finish straight and attempt to extinguish it himself. This left De Grassi as the sole finisher, 2 laps down at 15th. De Grassi returned to a race seat for the Japanese Grand Prix, his home race. D'Ambrosio once again took De Grassi's seat for first practice, while only Glock and Al-Jaswari set times in Saturday practice due to torrential rain. The decision was then made to postpone qualifying until Sunday morning. The 6 drivers lined up in team formation, with Trulli fastest, followed by Kovalainen, De Grassi, Glock, Senna and Yamamoto. De Grassi's race was over before it even started, as he span out and crashed at 130R on his way to the grid. A 4-car pile-up at the start brought the safety car out, at which point Trulli, Glock and Senna decided to pit for a long stint, though Glock pitted again the following lap due to problems with the soft tyre. Glock caught and passed Senna by lap 7, but both he and Trulli were stuck behind a slow Yamamoto for some time, with Trulli passing him on lap 14th and Glock having to wait until he pitted on lap 31. Kovalainen pitted on lap 35 and came out ahead of Trulli, at which point he enjoyed strong pace only to be lapped once. He finished a stellar 12th, an entire lap ahead of Trulli, with Glock 30 seconds behind, and Senna just 1.5 seconds further back. Yamamoto's lack of pace showed once again, as he was lapped by all four of them despite leading Glock and Senna until the halfway mark. Formula 1 remained in the Far East, visiting South Korea for the first time. Most drivers had teething problems with the new circuit. Both HRTs spun off in first practice, while D'Ambrosio took over from Di Grassi for the third Grand Prix weekend in a row. Trulli missed a lot of running due to gearbox issues. Trulli maintained his spike in form by going fastest of the sixth in qualifying, with Glock splitting the Lotuses and Yamamoto managing to outqualify Senna for the first time. The rain that had afflicted the Japanese Grand Prix made its way to the Korean peninsula, with the race starting under a safety car in wet conditions. It was red flagged after only 3 laps due to the increasing rain and remained suspended for 45 minutes. At the restart, the safety car remained out for 14 laps, during which time Yamamoto ran wide, Senna pitted once for new tyres and Di Grassi 3 times. Senna and Trulli both spun at the restart. Senna pitted straight away for a very early set of intermediate tyres, with Trulli following a lap later when the safety car was brought out again following championship leader Webber's collision with Rosberg. Trulli collided with Senna when trying to pass him at the second restart and lost his front wing. He pitted but retired anyway with yet more hydraulic issues 5 laps later. Glock, Kovalainen and Yamamoto had moved up to 13th, 14th and 15th after several midfielders pitted during the safety cars. Yamamoto struggled massively at the restart, losing 4 places in 1 lap before being hit by Di Grassi in his attempt to pass, who span into the barriers. The pitting midfielders began to work their way through Kovalainen and Glock, with Kovalainen being sent into a 360-degree spin by Buemi, who then lost control and ran into Glock at turn 3, losing a wheel in the process, with Glock coming into the pits with terminal damage, resulting in a double DNF for Virgin. The safety car was brought out for a third time, which allowed Yamamoto to unlap himself. The 3 remaining drivers had a quiet final stint, with Kovalainen getting a strong 13th, and Yamamoto chasing Senna down for 14th, giving HRT their best result of the season so far. The season approached its end at Brazil. The day before Friday practice, HRT announced that Cleon would be taking Yamamoto's seat once again. D'Ambrosio had his 4th outing for Virgin in Friday practice 1, while rain affected running in Saturday practice. The rain stayed for qualifying, with Glock once again beating both Lotuses, and Cleon once again beating Senna. Buemi and Sutil were given 5-place penalties for their collisions in the previous race, which moved Glock up to 17th, Trulli to 18th, Glock to 20th, and Di Grassi to 21st. Cleon's car stopped at the end of the pit lane on its way to the grid for the race due to fluctuating fuel pressure. He was brought back to the garage and did not get going until 4 laps in. Kovalainen managed to pass both Trulli and Glock at the start. Trulli ran close behind Glock in the first stint and managed to pass him during the pit stops and stick close to his teammate. Di Grassi was running a long opening stint but was forced to pit with suspension issues and came out 7 laps later, 3 laps behind Cleon. It was a close finish, with Kovalainen coming home in 18th, Trulli less than a second behind, Glock 6 seconds further back and Senna only a further second behind, a rare moment of competitiveness for HRT. The season reached its climactic finale at Abu Dhabi. Cleon once again took over from Yamamoto, and Di Grassi made his first Friday Practice 1 appearance since Monza. The 6 drivers lined up in team order for qualifying. Despite not beating any of the established teams on pure pace, their improvement over the season was clear to see. Trulli was fastest again, 1.7 seconds behind Buemi, Kovalainen was 0.2 seconds further back, while Glock was 0.4 seconds behind, beating his teammate by half a second. Senna was a further half second behind, finally beating Cleon by 0.2 of a second after having his brakes replaced before qualifying. Contrast this with the first race at Bahrain, where Glock was 2.7 seconds off of Al Jaswari and more than 5 seconds faster than Chandok in 24th. The safety car came out on lap 1 of the race after Liuzzi mounted Schumacher, by which point Kovalainen had already passed Trulli. Di Grassi, Senna and Cleon all pitted during this time, going on long stints for the remainder of the race. Kovalainen, Trulli and Glock stayed out but were quickly passed by the pitting Rosberg, Petrov and Al Jaswari at the restart. Trulli had been running with Glock close behind, but on lap 28 his front wing gave way, forcing him into a long pit stop, dropping him to last. Glock struggled to keep up with Kovalainen until his gearbox failed on lap 44, ending his season on a sour note. Trulli had been closing in on the HRTs when his rear wing then gave way on lap 51, putting him out of the race. Kovalainen had a quiet race and came home in 17th, a whole lap ahead of the struggling Di Grassi, who was being chased hard at the end by Senna, with Klein a further 13 seconds behind. With the season over, Lotus stamped their authority on Virgin and HRT by finishing 10th in the Constructors' Championship. Despite having the slowest car all year, HRT managed to beat Virgin to 11th in the standings. Due to being beaten by Lotus, Richard Branson honoured a bet made with Tony Fernandez at the beginning of the season, where whoever's team lost would have to serve as a stewardess of their rival's airline, in full uniform. Kovalainen had shone all season after struggling at McLaren for 2 years. Rarely were any of his rivals able to challenge him on race pace, and aside from his dramatic clash with Webber at Valencia, he kept himself out of trouble and had good reliability with 5 non-finishes. He finished the season in 20th with a best result of 12th at the Japanese Grand Prix. Trulli had largely got the better of his teammate in qualifying but had poorer race pace, a reputation he had gained long before joining Lotus, but also had recurrent hydraulic issues throughout the season, giving him 9 non-finishes, resulting in 21st in the championship with a best result of 13th at the Japanese Grand Prix. Chandhok was dropped by HRT at the halfway point of the season, and struggled the most of the rookie drivers at the start, but took advantage of the attrition rate in the early races to finish 22nd in the championship with a best result of 14th at the Australian and Monaco Grand Prix, despite ending the latter underneath Trulli's car. Senna had a difficult opening season. His qualifying and race pace were good, traits shared with his late uncle, but the car was difficult to handle and had numerous reliability issues, resulting in 9 retirements, the most of any driver that year. He however managed to beat both Virgins to finish 23rd in the championship with a best result of 14th at the Korean Grand Prix. Di Grassi had a good rookie season. He was able to keep up with his vastly more experienced teammate, but was best remembered for crashing on the way to the grid at Suzuka. He finished in 24th with 7 non-finishes and a best result of 14th at the Malaysian Grand Prix. He and Senna both had a next best result of 15th, but Senna finished ahead as he had a third best result of 2 16th places at the Malaysian and Chinese Grand Prix, while Di Grassi had 2 17th place finishes at the European and Belgian Grand Prix. Glock was the only driver to match the Lotuses in qualifying and race pace, but he had a slow start to the season with 3 retirements and a non-start. Retirements at the wrong moments left him 25th in the championship with a best result of 14th at the Japanese Grand Prix and a next best of 16th at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Yamamoto had only brief moments of potential in an otherwise lacklustre campaign replacing Chandhok. He only retired once at Hockenheim after possibly switching the car off himself, but finished 26th in the championship with a best result of 15th at the Korean Grand Prix. Klein did only 3 races after a 4-year absence from the sport, but showed himself as the only teammate to provide any level of competition to Senna, out-qualifying him twice. He finished 27th and last in the championship with a best result of 20th at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Join me for part 2, where we shall look at the new team's 2011 campaigns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.